So that kicks things off with the Baltimore Ravens. We highlighted some of the needs that they still have, including outside and inside linebacker in their scheme, outside backer being more of the Matthew Judon edge rusher, trying to find a complement to him. Interior offensive line, now that Marshall Yanda has retired, and then some more wide receiver depth. What are your thoughts on the Ravens, some of the stuff they've already done, and some of these holes still to fill?
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of the moves they've already made. Linebacker is a need, particularly inside, but I think that's the most sort of attainable position in today's defenses, particularly a team like Ravens, who have been working on this positionless defense where everybody moves around. They scheme up blitz pressure, they scheme up coverage really well on the back end. So if anybody doesn't need linebackers, it's kind of this defense. At least from an off the ball inside linebacker point of view. But the interior of the offensive line suddenly becomes an issue with the retirement of Marshall Yanda. So I think that's where you focus initially.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on the linebacker deal. I mean, the way they use Chuck Clark in and around the line of scrimmage, the way they use Earl Thomas, I mean, they are one of those teams that are turning safeties really into linebackers. So the actual linebacker depth chart of LJ Fort, Ataro Alaka, Chris Board. I mean, there's just no names there. Plus, Josh Bynes and Patrick Onwuasor. How's that? Both of those guys as free agents. So, I mean, they still need to replace some of the linebackers there. There's a lot of mock drafts that are giving them Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma, Patrick Queen from LSU, two guys that are projected to go in the late first round. That's where the Ravens are. So. I don't know if it's going to be a position that they truly attack, though, because of and here's another guy. Hi, buddy. All right, we'll go ask Mommy for those Cheerios. So I don't know if it's really a position that they attack in the first round. There is some good guard value in the second round. Jonah Jackson's our top guy from Ohio State. Netane Muti. How about him? Sam, I saw you got him in playing around with those mock drafts from Fresno State. He would be a perfect fit from Fresno to the Ravens.
Yeah, that's the guy I really like because the Ravens are running this sort of power-based offense. I got my own little distraction in the background as well. Although she's just bailed with her iPad to go do whatever. They are a team that embraces this whole power run game, with what they're doing with Lamar Jackson, with the sort of power run based scheme. Marshall Yanda was a player who was not scheme specific. Marshall Yanda could play in any scheme, could do anything you want him to, is one of the best offensive linemen of his generation, this generation. So him leaving does open up a significant hole on that offensive line. But I think Muti would fill that specific role in this offense right now. If down the line they transition away from that and go to, different types of offense, maybe he becomes a player that's expendable. But for right now, I think he's a perfect fit.
Yeah, Ravens had the number 2 offensive line by PFF rankings last year. Lose Yanda, so definitely have someone to replace there. But yeah, overall, I mentioned on the other podcast, really like what the Ravens have done, bringing in Calais Campbell, probably overpaid for Michael Brockers, but you made the point too, replacing a Michael Pierce, who really couldn't get after the quarterback. Brockers is a little bit better rushing the passer, and there's some multi-gap versatility with Brockers, with Calais Campbell, and again, with everybody on the Ravens defense. Really love what they've done there. I still think cornerback is a place that they need to go. Just to keep the pipeline going because Marlon Humphrey's going to have to get paid really soon. Marcus Peters, keep those guys going. That would be my suggestion in Baltimore.
Right, and you got to move on or replace what you had in Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith, I think, is a guy that, whether he was coming back or not, is someone that they could potentially have looked to get younger and cheaper at. So, cornerback, because you need so many of them in today's NFL, is never a position where you're set. You kind of like the idea that you should draft a quarterback every single year because the value is so high. Cornerback, I think for a different reason, you should do the same thing. You should be drafting a corner every single year because you need like 4 or 5 of them on your depth chart. So keep swinging, because you're never going to be able to keep 4 or 5 quality ones at any given time. The turnover is too high, whether it's paying them, whether it's them getting old and retiring. You need to keep replacing that.
And the same thing with quarterback, the payout doesn't necessarily match, what you have to give up for it. The payout is so strong when you actually hit. So it's almost worth finding that one corner, even if it takes you 3 shots at it. You know what I mean? Now we go to our hometown Cincinnati Bengals. This was a clear need. A quarterback like Joe Burrow, well written, Mr. Ben Lindsay. The Bengals have done, I think, a sneaky good job of at least adding talent to their team. I don't love every single contract that they've handed out, but they just added Von Bell, a safety from the Saints yesterday. They've added a lot to their secondary, and some decent moves by them in free agency.
We take a second and just appreciate the idea that the Bills are favorite for the AFC East. Just let that sink in across the landscape for a second. How insane is that? But that's the situation we're going to be dealing with. They better hope that it's not a Cleveland Browns repeat, because like the Browns were favorites for the AFC North for the first time in forever, and look how that worked out. But yeah, they really are. So Bengals, yeah, they've spent in free agency for the first time in a long time, and not just sort of brought in a player. They've spent consistently. Like, they've gone after and brought a lot of players in and addressed some needs. And obviously the Bengals had a lot of needs given how high they're picking in the draft. It's no secret that the biggest need is quarterback, and Andy Dalton is available because they're expecting the draft one. So where do you think they are? Are they completely dialed in on Joe Burrow, or is there any chance whatsoever that they are interested in moving off the number 1 pick and drafting Tua, or B, simply taking Tua number 1?
I don't think they're in the take Tua market. I think any team sitting at 1, even if maybe not if Peyton Manning's sitting there, but if you're sitting at 1, you'd be stupid not to at least hear offers. A team like the Dolphins that has so many first-round picks, or the Jags, or whoever it is. I mean, you'd be stupid to not listen to an offer that was like 3 firsts and 2 seconds or something like that. And then you weigh the options. I could have Joe Burrow, or I can have Tua plus 4 other extremely valuable picks. So I mean, you should at least listen to those offers if they're ridiculous, right? If somebody wants to dial in on Burrow that much. But I think ultimately that's where the Bengals. The way the Bengals draft is they basically say, here's the player, a player that we would take at 1. If that player is a guy that we would normally take at this position and he's there, we'll take him, right? And they don't look for these offers to trade down or move around the draft board. If they're comfortable taking a player at their spot, they'll take them. And I think ultimately that's where it's going to land. They're comfortable taking Joe Burrow at 1, and he'll be the guy. And they were bad last year, but part of that was injuries and other other things that came about. This could be a competitive team, I think, this year, based off some of the moves they've made, some of the guys they're getting back between A.J. Green, Jonah Williams. What do you think about the Bengals being much improved in 2020?
I think there's a good chance they could be. The offensive line still massively concerns me, but that's kind of dependent on how good the quarterback is, right? Assuming it's Joe Burrow. If he's really, really good, he can immediately change the dynamic of how that offensive line looks. Plus, obviously, Jonah Williams coming in and fixing the most important spot in theory right away. It could be a lot better, but that offensive line, just from an on-paper standpoint, still is pretty concerning. The Burrow thing is interesting, or the whether you listen to offers, because I think it all starts with your evaluation of those 2 quarterbacks. Like, if you believe that Joe Burrow is fantastic and Tua is significantly further below, I don't think you even listen to the offers. I think there's nothing that should move you off that spot. To me, you take the guy that you think can be a franchise-changing player, and you don't screw around with it. If you think they're pretty close, then you start listening to conversations and figuring out how absurd the offer needs to be before you're willing to take the lower percentage chance that you've nailed it with that draft pick. So I think it kind of depends where they are in those two guys. It just seems that the stars have aligned too much in terms of, relatively local kid coming home, his incredible season a year ago, even though it was basically 1 year. I think it just makes too much sense for them to take him number one and never look back.
Yeah, I think your point's a valid one as far as how close are they. I mean, I think you would have to run the numbers on what that would look like, and then there's other factors as well. But yeah, I think the Bengals creeping back toward average as a roster, still question marks on the offensive line, and the annual question about linebacker. I wouldn't attack linebacker too high in the draft. I think what they do on the turn is really interesting. If they could get, I mentioned on the other podcast, Josh Jones, the left tackle out of Houston. If you can get him top of the second round, and you've got Burrow and then a tackle for the second year in a row, near the top of the draft, I'd feel much better. Not that he's a slam dunk or anything like that, but you have to start throwing some resources again at that offensive line and getting it back on track. So, maybe get a Josh Jones, maybe get a guard later in the draft and try to rebuild there. But I like, and then with all the veterans that they've added to the defense, adding some youth and playmakers there as well, another option.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. So the first pick is going to go on Joe Burrow. I think their second round pick at the top of the second round should absolutely be on the offensive line somewhere. I think that's their biggest glaring need outside of that, particularly because I think the next need for them, to me, is also wide receiver, right? Because you got AJ Green back on 1 year. He may not even last the whole year if you think you can trade him on. And this is a great receiver draft. So you can hold fire until like the third round potentially on wide receivers and still get a quality player that you don't have to spend that first or second pick on a wideout and still get a quality player. So, I think definitely target offensive line at the top of the second. I think then start looking at which of those wide receivers starts to slip to the point where they're available when you're picking in the mid rounds, because you can get a guy that will impact this team right away from day one, along with Tyler Boyd, along with AJ Green, help out Joe Burrow and not have to spend a giant amount of money to make it happen. So, candidates that might slip into those mid rounds, guys like Michael Pittman Jr. from USC, who's, a bigger body guy, but it's got some route running savvy to him. He's got good hands. He's got pretty good playmaking ability all around, to be honest, particularly for a guy of that size. He's the kind of guy that could be available in the mid rounds and be an immediate starter for that team.
That would be great. Fans do this all the time, and I detest it, which is just go round by round and say, get this position here, this position there, this position there. But the way we're doing it is more based off. No, the way you did it was fine, because we're doing it based off of how the draft board might fall. It doesn't mean I have to go get a tackle here no matter what. I have to go get a receiver here no matter what. We're just looking at guys that potentially could be there at each spot. And if they came away with Joe Burrow, Josh Jones, and Michael Pittman, say, I think you're looking at a pretty nice top of the draft for the Bengals. All right, Cleveland Browns next up in the AFC. Again, in the preview show, I thought a perfect scenario was them to get a veteran left tackle like a Jason Peters and then draft one. They went a different veteran route. They paid a ton of money for Jack Conklin at right tackle. Should be a good upgrade. I mean, it's an upgrade at right tackle. Mm-hmm. We know they paid a ton of money for Austin Hooper. The left tackle position is still out there, and as far as like predicting what a team's going to do in the draft, I don't know if this is the easiest prediction in the draft, that the Browns are going to take a left tackle at number 10 overall, but it has to be who they're targeting, especially since there's 4 names sitting atop that have top 10 potential. Browns' biggest need, certainly left tackle right now.
Yeah, it is. And it's unfortunate for them because I don't know if rookie left tackles have the best success rate in the NFL in terms of hitting the ground running year one and being productive players. I think the Browns could potentially or should potentially prepare for the idea that whoever they take is, I don't want to say a liability year one, but it's not helping the situation in year one. I still think that they would be in a fantastic situation if they did sign a Jason Peters to a 1-year deal, let whoever they draft at the top of the first round sit there for a year and learn, kind of like the way the Eagles did a season ago with Andre Dillard, and be the guy that helps in year 2 and beyond. But they're probably not going to do that by the way they've done things so far. So they're going to be basically picking their favorite left tackle at that spot, whether it's an Andrew Thomas from Georgia, whether it's Tristan Wirfs with the insane keg thighs and the absurd jumping ability and speed and combine numbers. They're basically just going to be picking their favorite that they've evaluated the best and is available, and hoping that guy can plug in and solve their left tackle problem. And again, put all the focus on Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, Andrew Thomas is my guy there from Georgia. I think he'd be the best fit for many teams up there. He's the top tackle on our draft board. So I think the key there, though, Sam, is they don't need the left tackle to be special right when he comes in, because they added Conklin and at least got the right tackle position better. Joel Bitonio's at left guard, J.C. Treader at center, and Conklin at right tackle. Those are above average players at each spot. Still a question at right guard with Wyatt Teller, who I still hold out hope for, and a question mark at left tackle. When we talk about getting back to the mid-tier, creeping back toward average offensive line-wise, I think they've already done it. As long as the left tackle's not Julian Davenport or early career George Fant, or a guy that's going to be a 75 pressure guy, I think they're in much better shape as far as the offensive line goes. And then, when you draft a guy, it's also for the long term as well. So I think that's where they're ultimately going to go. What about the rest of the roster? Losing Joe Schobert at linebacker, you've got some question marks there. Mac Wilson he didn't play great last year after having that really hyped up preseason where he made some nice plays. I like a little bit of what they did at safety, bringing in Carl Joseph, low risk, seeing if you could get more out of him than the Raiders did. Andrew Sendejo. I mean, their secondary could be shaping up to be pretty solid, but I think more depth all across the back seven is another place that they can go in the draft.
Yeah, I think depth generally across defense is where they could go. Obviously, they could stand to upgrade, and B, prepare to get cheaper from Olivier Vernon. He didn't have the kind of impact we thought he might have a season ago, but he wasn't the only one. I think they'll probably run with those young linebackers and see what they can do. The combination of Mac Wilson, of Sione Takitaki, and then in the secondary, I think a huge amount rests on what Greedy Williams looks like in year 2. Because, he was a player that we really liked coming out, didn't love the schematic fit that he ended up in. I think if he rounds into the kind of player that we thought he could be, that secondary is in really good shape. If he struggles again in year 2, now that secondary corner spot is a major problem that they need to fix, this time a year from now. Or you could preempt that by taking another swing in the draft and potentially giving Greedy Williams some competition or a backup option if and when he struggles during the season.
The way the draft is, they're positioned well to either attack that cornerback position again, or what do you think about receiver? If you have Odell Beckham, you have Jarvis Landry, wide receiver 3 is a question mark. They're sitting there with the 9th overall pick in round 2, and then they have 2 third-rounders, 10th overall and 33rd overall. I think receivers and corners are going to be solid in that 2nd and 3rd round range. I think could be the way to go for the Browns, especially if they go tackle at 10 overall. But wide receiver 3, something they should be looking at?
I think generally they should be, again, hedging their bets a little bit with this receiver group. I mean, we talked before about maybe you would think about moving on from one of those guys, whether it was trading Odell Beckham to the Patriots for 23 overall, whether it's, I think the personalities, the collection of those personalities still concerns me. I think they potentially got better at being able to handle it with the change in head coach, but I know those guys, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, they were teammates at LSU. In theory, it should work perfectly harmoniously, but that was before they were both millionaires. 2, it didn't involve Baker Mayfield, who was his own strong personality being thrown into the equation. And 3, it now needs to come together quickly and everybody function in the same direction. Alternatively, you could think about breaking that whole thing up. And, I think Jarvis Landry in particular, I think there's too much upside and talent in Odell Beckham to be completely writing him off. So
Right.
let's start thinking about how you could upgrade on Jarvis Landry, and a guy like KJ Hill from Ohio State would be really fascinating. I think he is sort of pigeonholed as a slot receiver at the next level, but another guy that crushed the Senior Bowl all week long, at least when it comes to route running, right? He dropped a couple of passes, so his grade wasn't as good as some of these other guys. But in terms of route running and getting open in the one-on-one drills, nobody could cover KJ Hill all week long. So I think Hill could come in right away, compete with Jarvis Landry for those slot snaps, become their third receiver when they do run 11 personnel, and then in the future, give you a reason to move on from Jarvis Landry and, A, get cheaper at the position, and B, remove one of those dominant personalities from the group and try and streamline the whole thing.
All right. Pittsburgh Steelers, Sam. They actually made some moves this offseason despite not having any money. Derek Watt was the one the fans loved. Brought him in to play fullback. The deep, dark Pittsburgh Steelers message boards just said, all we need is a running back and a fullback this offseason. Fullback, got it. Eric Ebron comes in at tight end. They found some money for that, and they franchise tag Bud Dupree. And they make the great move to bring in Stefan Wisniewski, who we kept saying was a good value pick. That's a nice replacement for Ramon Foster at left guard.
Best value signing every year, Stefan Wisniewski. No matter who he goes to, he's usually better than the guy he's replacing, and always plays well for a fraction of the cost.
By the way, don't forget the Steelers already used their first-round pick on Minkah Fitzpatrick, so they don't pick until the 17th overall pick of round 2.
How much must it suck to be the moderately crappy Watt? You've got Hall of Fame talent, JJ. You've got Defensive Player of the Year talent, TJ. And then you got Derek, who's an okay fullback. Like, that's got to suck, right?
It still plays well. Still pays well, I think, to be the third best Watt.
Oh, I mean, it's better than our situation right here, recording this from our basement. I'm just saying that the family get together.
I'm in my attic,
where it's like Hall of Famer, All Pro. Yeah,
that's Derek.
It's tough.
Well, he gets to play with his brother at least. Two Watts.
True. That's nice.
On the same.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they don't pick until round 2. Minkah is their first round pick this year. Was that worth it?
Probably not. I think they're a team that's starting to have some cracks and need some holes. They're also a team that's in this spot of probably needing to address quarterback at some point, and they don't really have an easy path to doing that. Ben Roethlisberger is coming back looking like Tom Hanks from Castaway, apparently throwing without pain. Tom Hanks from Castaway or Matthew Patricia, depending on whether you're looking at photo or video evidence. Either way, like, his draft class is done at this point, right? Phillip Rivers is being cast away. We hope he has one more year. You've got it's Eli's retired. Ben Roethlisberger is the last man standing, and he's coming off a big injury. They showed last year the quarterback's already on the roster and not capable of replacing him, at least weren't a year ago. And they don't have the easy option to go and draft a first-round replacement this year. They're they need to figure out some kind of replacement for quarterback sooner rather than later. I don't see an obvious way of doing it.
Yeah, the other part where they're in a tough spot, too, is they only have 6 picks this year. So if they do use one of them on a quarterback to look to the future, first off, Ben hates that. Big Ben hates when they draft other quarterbacks. Yes. It's a waste of a pick on Big Ben's team. So I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to keep pushing this quarterback search down the road. They don't have the money. There's a lot of rumors that they're going to bring in Jameis Winston, which would be awesome. But there's a lot of rumors for that, but they don't have the money to bring him in. So they're in this weird win now mode, right? Like, the last year their defense was good. They could win games because of their defense. That's tough to bank on from year to year. But they don't have a ton of holes on the D. It's win now mode. I would love to see them take another receiver, though, too, and add even more depth behind Juju, James Washington, Deontay Johnson. More weapons there. Ebron, try to air it out, win through the pass game. That's it. Steelers.
Yeah, I agree. I think the receiving core is actually in a much better spot than it was a year ago if they get a quarterback back. If Roethlisberger comes back and he's good again, that propels Deontay Johnson skyward. It makes Juju look a lot better. James Washington potentially gets resuscitated, but Washington's spot in particular is the one that's vulnerable to an upgrade, especially in this draft. You can go targeting one of those guys and dramatically propel them in the right direction. A guy that could slip into the second and does a lot of dynamic things. Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State. I think he would be an interesting guy on that team to potentially upgrade them.
And O-line depth, another place where like Jonah Jackson, our second best guard out of Ohio State, could be a good second round pick and have the long term option, while Stefan is the Band-Aid for 1 year.
Right.
You want to get rid of me and get back to more great PFF YouTube content? All you have to do is push that button right there and subscribe. Thanks for watching.